In the name of the risen Christ, amen. You may be seated. So if you've been here the past couple of Sundays, you know that I've been asking folks to turn to your neighbor and say something to begin the sermon today. And I had something in mind, but I didn't love it. So I asked Deacon Denise what she thought the opener should be. And she came up with something much better than me. So in our gospel text that we just heard, two disciples on the road to Emmaus suddenly recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread, and they see him for who he is. And as we know, part of our faith affirms that we see Jesus Christ in the face of other people. So here is your instruction. Turn to your neighbor and say, "Jesus, is that you?" You ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Jesus, yes, he's everywhere. Thank you. All right, and you can expect that from me throughout Eastertide. So, let's see. I became an Episcopalian 22 years ago. And one thing I started to do when I found the Episcopal Church is light a candle for a loved one. This was a new thing for me. So you know, in the Chapel of the Resurrection back there are all these little candles, and you can light one, you can kneel, say a prayer. So I started doing that practice on my way to work. Every morning, I'd stop in a big, beautiful church and say a prayer. And somehow, I had found my way to the back of the prayer book, where there is a compilation of prayers that begin on page 810. So I want you to grab your prayer book, black book with a gold cross, and flip to 810. It's called Prayers and Thanksgivings for all manner of parts of life. And if you ever show up to church early, hopefully that happens, flip it open and spend some time in these prayers, especially if there's one, it addresses something you need to pray about. Because some of them, they just really make you feel seen. They're human and holy. And you think, wow, the person who wrote this really gets it. So turn to page 831. Page 831, I'm going to take you to the bottom of the page. It's prayer number 56 for victims of addiction. And that's the prayer I prayed when I would light a candle for a loved one who suffers from addiction. And, this is a very common thing. So I'm going to pray this prayer. You pray it silently, and maybe there's someone in your life that you want to hold in your heart while you do it. Well, I should probably grab a prayer book to do so. Thank you. So we're on page 831. Page 831 at the bottom of the page for the victims of addiction. O blessed Lord, you ministered to all who came to you. Look with compassion upon all who through addiction have lost their health and freedom. Restore to them the assurance of your unfailing mercy. Remove from them the fears that beset them. Strengthen them in the work of their recovery, and to those who care for them, give patient understanding and persevering love. Amen. Thank you, Lisa. So I had printed that prayer out to cut it out in a little slip of paper. I laminated it, and I kept it in my wallet. And I would kneel, light a candle, pray this prayer. Sometimes I would rush through it because I was late for work. Sometimes I'd really take my time, tears streaming down my face. I might light a second candle if I got really choked up. And then I'd put a little dollar in the wooden collection box and be on my way. Now this was a time 20 years ago when men still had change in their pockets. I don't know if any of you guys still have change in your pockets, But my husband did, and he would, put it on the countertop at the end of the day, and I would be plucking quarters off the countertop, getting ready to go do my spiritual discipline. And one day he said, "You have great faith." And I thought, well, yeah, I'm faithful in this daily practice. I'm faithful in my love for this person I pray for and in my love for God. But I was acting out of hope that God would heal. Faith is what keeps my hope alive, then and now. But hope can be tricky. It's a bit of a question mark in our gospel text today. So let's go there. We have two disciples on the road to Emmaus. It is Easter Day in the afternoon, and these disciples they're not part of the main ones, but they're disciples nonetheless, and they're going from Jerusalem to a town called Emmaus, which Luke tells us is a 7-mile journey. And interestingly, only one disciple is named, Cleopas, Luke tells us. Cleopas and whoever was Cleopas's travel companion. My spiritual director gave me an icon, a little depiction of this scene, and the other disciple is a woman. The idea being that the other disciple is Mary, wife of Clopas, who John mentions went to the tomb on Easter morning. So Cleopas, pretty close. I like this explanation that it could have been a woman disciple and a married couple. Another way to interpret the unknown disciple is as an invitation for us to step into those shoes, so that the lack of detail actually allows us to see the journey to Emmaus as part of our own spiritual walk. Now, Barbara Brown Taylor, anybody ever heard of her? Pretty famous in Episcopal circles especially, author, priest, theologian. She calls the road to Emmaus the road of deep disappointment. Deep disappointment, because that's what it is for these two disciples today. They are grieving a loss. They are confused and distraught. We had hoped, they say. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Now, we too might say something similar about hope. We had hoped that getting a master's degree in our field of study would allow us to get a job in that field. We had hoped that our marriage would last forever. We had hoped that we'd have a baby by now. We had hoped that we'd be able to retire by now. We had hoped that we would have kicked that bad habit by now, or lost the weight by now. We had hoped that our wayward child would have come home by now, or that our alcoholic loved one would have stopped drinking by now. So we walk the road of deep disappointment. Disappointment in ourselves, disappointment in family members, in co-workers, and government leaders, in our clergy, and disappointment in God. You know, sometimes we think we know exactly what we need, exactly what God should do for us. This isn't God's will that we're experiencing. We know how God should come in and fix it and save us. But God never promised to save us from anything but our own sin. And sometimes we leave God out of the picture altogether. We don't seek anything from God. We rely on our own devices, our own ability to grin and bear it. We tell ourselves, or worse, we tell someone else who's suffering, everything happens for a reason. When God closes a door, God opens a window. Or some other platitude or form of pep talk. And then sometimes we cry out to God in utter bewilderment because we have no clue what to do. Perhaps that's where real hope begins. A hope that comes from falling down and falling short, from getting hurt and hurting others, from realizing we are wrong, devastatingly wrong, when we could have sworn we were right. This is a hope that reaches into our pain and darkness and confusion and pulls us up out of it. That is the hope of resurrection. Our hope is in Jesus Christ himself. Only a God who has borne suffering can bring us any hope of resurrection. Now, as many of our gospel stories reveal, resurrection doesn't always look like what we expect. Jesus in his resurrected form didn't look like what his disciples expected because they didn't recognize him. Mary Magdalene didn't recognize him in the garden by the tomb. Thomas didn't recognize him until he saw the wounds in the hands. And then the disciples on the road to Emmaus didn't recognize him until eventually they saw him in the breaking of the bread, when he broke bread. And then he vanishes from their sight. And they start running back to Jerusalem. And on the way, they're talking about this experience, and they say, "Did not our hearts burn within us when he was explaining the gospel?" So resurrection was happening before their eyes, but they didn't know that. They didn't know what it was, but their hearts were burning nonetheless. Resurrection doesn't always look like what we expect. It's true about Jesus, and it's true about life. Resurrection might be a blessing in disguise, or a lesson learned the hard way. It could be the end of a relationship that wasn't good for you. It could be receiving or doing more than you could ever ask or imagine. But one thing's for sure, it always includes growth in God and coming nearer to Christ as we are conformed to his likeness. Okay, so spiritual maturity and coming closer to Jesus. My loved one still has an alcohol problem. However, after many fervent years of prayer, it looks a lot different. This person's heart has softened so that it swells with love. Their tongue has been loosened so that it articulates emotion. And their eyes have been opened so that they weep with gratitude. That is resurrection. And it calls for me to keep on praying. Our faith does not lead us to gloss over pain, ourselves or anyone else's. Our faith leads us through the pain so that we can stare in the face of deep disappointment and say, my God is bigger than this. My God is bigger than this, and nothing is immune to the power of resurrection. For light will always outshine the darkness. Love will always be stronger than death. And our hearts will forever burn with hope. Amen? Amen. Amen.